Ralph, I have to say, there's something that constantly draws me back to this story, which essentially we know very little about, but we're going to talk about it anyway, is those pictures which feel, oh, like pictures are so dated because they were obviously taken in a studio. I can kind of vaguely remember that backdrop. They used to
Yes,
kind of come into the schools and take those sort of head and shoulders shots of you because, of course, there wasn't a
yes,
million pictures on your mobile phone as there is now.
yes.
But this couple, Conor and Sheila Dwyer, obviously went into a studio somewhere and had these photographs taken. They're almost slightly creepy looking because of what's happened since. But nonetheless, tell me a little bit about them because it's one of the most puzzling missing person cases in the country.
Yeah, I think it is, Nicola, for a number of different reasons. I mean, we're all too familiar with the fact that, unfortunately and tragically for families, people go missing in Ireland almost every week. Most of them are found, but sadly, some are not. But it is exceptionally unusual for a couple to go missing and never to be found. It's as if they stepped off the planet.
Mm.
And particularly the age profile of this couple, because Conor was 62, his wife Sheila was 61. They were, to all intents and purposes, a very ordinary, family orientated, community involved couple. They lived at Chapel Hill in Fermoy, which is about 25 miles north of Cork City. Very involved in the community. They had two children who were adults in 1991. They were very involved in the church. Their home was actually in the shadow of St. Patrick's Church in Fermoy. And on the morning of April the 30th, 1991, Conor and Sheila were going to a local funeral. They were seen walking up the steps to the church. They stopped to talk to a local girl, Catherine Fenton. A few pleasantries were exchanged. And that was the last time that anyone saw Conor and Sheila Dwyer. There was a huge Garda investigation. There have been two separate crime call features on RTE, one back in the 1990s and the other just last week. And despite all of that, despite the Gardai working with Interpol, despite their descriptions being circulated through over 50 countries, there has been no inkling, no trace, no clue as regards what happened to this couple.
33 years they've just been missing without trace.
Yeah, 33 years. And there's so many remarkable aspects to this. There was nothing to indicate that there was anything wrong. There was no external reason or cause for them to disappear. When Gardai gained access to their home on May the 22nd, what had happened was that Conor and Sheila were last seen on April the 30th, but Sheila did have contact with members of her family by telephone on May the 1st. That was the last actual contact with the couple. About 2 weeks
And
later,
was that telephone call made from the house?
yes, made from the house.
Okay, so they had gone home after this funeral.
Yes, and the call was made from the property the following day. Of course, remember, this is an era before the widespread availability of mobile phones.
Yeah.
So it was very much landline dependent. And about 2 weeks later, Sheila's family became quite concerned because they couldn't contact them. Contact was made with Conor's workplace in Castlelyons, about maybe 8 miles outside Fermoy. Conor had worked as a handyman cum chauffeur for a German businessman called Fritz Wolf, and they had no indication of what had happened to Conor. So Gardai gained access to the property on May the 22nd, and there was nothing to indicate that they had vanished. The house was entirely in order. The only thing unusual was there was a pile of mail or post just inside the front door where it had been delivered but had not been opened. There was a sizable sum of money found in the house. The passports for both Conor and Sheila were recovered there. All of their clothing was exactly where it should be. There was no sign of any disappearance. And I suppose most bizarrely, their luggage was actually found there as well. So if they had been planning a trip or they had been intending to go somewhere, they certainly didn't bring the things you would expect them to require for that trip.
Right.
And so the only thing that was actually missing from the house was a white Toyota Cressida car that Conor drove and that served as the family vehicle. There was no trace of the car. And despite enormous efforts by Gardai to trace the car via ports, airports, car parks, Gardai examined the River Blackwater, which of course runs through Fermoy. They even went to garages and to motor factors that would sell secondhand vehicle parts to see did anyone have anything that could be traced back to this Toyota, all in vain.
Oh, it's just so weird. So it's this ordinary couple living an ordinary life. He's still working. They have grown-up children, so they're completely settled with each other and within their community. And they go home from a church one day. We know they spend the night in the house, and at some point over those next 2 weeks, they disappear without trace. No passports taken, no evidence in the aftermath that any money has been withdrawn from their bank accounts. So they're gone. Like, why has this never become a murder inquiry? Okay, there's no evidence that there was a struggle at the house, obviously,
No.
along with everything else, but it sounds really strange that it has just remained a missing persons case, does it not?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, the difficulty from the Garda point of view is that they have nothing to work with.
Yeah.
There's no sign of a struggle. There was no sign of any disturbance in the house. There was absolutely no indication of an external cause for this couple vanishing. So they really don't know what they're dealing with. And I think at every stage, the Garda investigation has been hampered because there were no witnesses that could have pointed the guards in the right direction. No one saw this Toyota Cressida car heading in a certain direction. No one saw Conor or Sheila Dwyer outside Fermoy after April the 30th, 1991. There's been no trace of the vehicle. Of course, remember, this is an era before the advent of widespread CCTV security camera networks.
Yeah.
So there's no trace on any CCTV footage of where they might have gone. And of course, crucially, as Gardaí have always said over the past 33 years, most especially during their latest crime call appeal, they believe the car is central to all of this. If they can find the car, they believe they can unravel the mystery over what happened to Conor and Sheila and offer some form of closure to their family.
There's one of two things that could have happened here, isn't there? They could have been taken by somebody, or they could have gone themselves and possibly harmed themselves. If so, how do you hide the car?
Yeah. And Gardaí are aware of that, and they have certainly gone to great lengths. There was extensive searches of the River Blackwater. Of course, the Blackwater runs through Fermoy. It's a sizable river. It does flood every so often during the year, so it's quite capable of moving things like cars some substantial distance if the river is in flood when the person goes there. But there has been no indication that that's what actually happened to the car. There was no trace of it at ports or airports. Gardaí searched car parks, motor factor dealers. And again, I suppose adding another level of intrigue or confusion to this is an overseas dimension, because while the search was focused on Ireland, because Conor's passports, all their travel documents were found in their property, Conor did work for a German businessman called Fritz Wolff in Castleinach. And in 93, 94, there was a reported sighting of someone that a person believed was Conor Dwyer. That was notified to the German police. It was notified to Interpol and to the Gardaí. So Gardaí took that very seriously, given the known German connection in terms of Conor's employer. But they now believe that that sighting was, while well-intentioned, was mistaken, and that it wasn't Conor Dwyer that was seen.
And like, back then in the early 90s, did you need a passport to get on a ferry to go to the UK? Because obviously there's there is an option, I suppose, to remove the vehicle from our territory through that means.
Yeah, you did, but that's not to say that they may not have managed to travel abroad without travel documents. We've seen cases of youngsters ending up in countries without passports and things like that as part of years just over recent years. So it is possible, but I think Gardaí still believe that the answers that they're looking for are somewhere here in Ireland.
Right.
And they've just been unlucky in that they've always been looking for that one little clue to point them in the right direction. They've never been able to find the car. There has never been any sightings of Conor and Sheila Dwyer. I suppose it's important to also say that their bank accounts were never accessed. They hadn't drained their accounts. There was no attempt to access those accounts after they vanished. So there's no money trail to follow. all of which has meant that despite their very best efforts, Gardaí have just not been able to get that crucial piece of information to unlock this mystery.
And what's happened to their house, do you know? I mean, have you kind of been down around and had a little bit of a nose around the whole story? Because it's a fascinating one. Is the house still as was?
Yeah, it's still there. No, would you believe it, Nicola? I'm from Fermoy, so I actually would pass the house almost every week. It was sold, I think, well over a decade ago.
Right.
So now under different ownership. Essentially, once Conor and Sheila were gone for 33 years, the courts allowed for the I suppose the clearance and the sorting out of their estate and their affairs. But the Garda investigation is still ongoing. There's been a major effort over the last year, I think, to go back and look at this case and see, was there something that could be followed up using modern techniques? Was there something that maybe greater emphasis should be laid on? So in fairness to the Gardaí in Fermoy, I mean, they've gone, Detective Sergeant James O'Shea, they've gone back to all of the original officers that were involved in the case, people like Sergeant Joe Watkins, Detective Tom Ryan, Detective John Conway. They're all retired now, but they were very much instrumental in the original investigation. The Gardaí, serving Gardaí, have gone back and spoke to them. They've asked for their opinion. They've asked for background information. They've gone to try and talk to an awful lot of the original people that were involved in the case file. So people that would have worked with Conor and Sheila Dwyer, neighbours, friends, just to see, is there some inkling, is there something that maybe was overlooked 33 years ago that might give them a breakthrough?
Did the Dwyers ever have anybody to speak out about themselves? And maybe that's what it is that draws me so much to those photographs, because they are literally locked in time in those photographs, and we'll hopefully put them up on the podcast for anybody who wants to see them if they haven't. They just seem to be just trapped there in that moment. And, you know, there's nobody, we're not seeing family or friends making appeals or coming forward in this case.
No, I mean, the family have been very supportive of the Gardaí, but I think it's been a very traumatic 33 years for them. I mean, they certainly were part of appeals in the early days.
Right.
But I think the family are, while they're obviously encouraging anybody who has information to come forward and contact the Gardaí, and the family are very supportive of the efforts made by Fermoy Gardaí over recent times. I just think that it's been such a painful and traumatic period for them that they're allowing Gardaí to work in the way that they normally would. And, you know, it's funny you should reference those photographs, because they very much are a kind of a slice of time. If you look at them, you can see that those photographs are very much the product of the late 80s, even the clothing, the hairstyles, the whole lot. And it also, I think, reflects on the type of couple that Conor and Sheila Dwyer were. They were very close. You would rarely see one without the other. I mean, Conor has been described to me, like, I remember Conor Dwyer, and how I remember him is, I mean, I would have been, I suppose, in my early, 20s at the time that they disappeared. And Conor was a man that you would always know, because he worked for Fritz Wolff, and one of his jobs for that German businessman was looking after his fleet of luxury cars. So you'd often see Conor driving through Fermoy in a Rolls Royce or a sports car, whatever. He would always keep the vehicles immaculate. But it was also not unusual to see him with his wife in those cars. And he was very much an old school gentleman. When he would park the car, he would insist on getting out of the driver's seat, walking around and opening the door for his wife. If they were coming out of a supermarket with shopping, he would always insist on carrying the shopping for his wife. And he was also a man that was very proud of his appearance. He was always immaculately turned out, very, very well dressed. And his appearance was something he took great pride in.
Yeah, as chauffeurs probably often are, I can sort of visualize that whole scenario. Can I ask you, or can you tell me, what are your theories on it?
Well, I would be very surprised if there was any, I suppose, violent undertones to this in terms of an external involvement.
Right.
Because I think, had that been the case, there would surely have been some type of evidence of it that would have come to Garda attention. The house was left literally as if they were going, out for a drive to the beach for a cup of tea, intending to return that evening. Everything was in its place. There was no sign of a disturbance. So for whatever reason that they decided to leave the property themselves and not return, I just don't know. And I think very much like the Gardai, they're operating in the absence of information. And that's what makes this case so baffling and so unusual, is that usually there's some little bit of an inkling or some little clue that will point you towards what most likely happened. That's not there in this case.
I've never heard the likes of a case like this. I mean, you know, as I said, there's one or two scenarios that they chose to do this. You'd imagine an ordinary couple like that, although we never know what's going on behind closed doors, but with family and friends and being so embedded in their community, they would have left a note. So there's nothing like that. There's nothing to indicate that they did choose to never come back. At the same time, there's no sign of violence. They clearly left together in the car. That's as much as we know.
Yeah, it is.
You know?
And it's true, Nicola. And if you look at it, say, for instance, had they been intending to start a new life, or had there been a reason for them to leave Fermoy and not to return, why would they have left all of their possessions behind? Why would they have left the money in their bank account? Why would they have left such a sizable amount of money in the property in cash that wasn't taken with them? It just, every single aspect of this case is confusing. And there doesn't seem to be anything to assist Gardai in terms of pointing towards a possible outcome. I think they have various theories, but I think a lot of those are mutually contradictory, and they just don't have the evidence to rule things out.
Well, I can tell you, Ralph, I'd rather you than me now, because if I was from Fermoy, this case would have me rolling around the bed at night. It would keep me awake, thinking up all sorts of ideas and scenarios that could have happened. Oh, it would actually torture me. So you can just imagine what it's like for their family and their loved ones after all these years, just knowing absolutely nothing. Obviously, fresh appeal there again this week, if anybody knows anything. Do you think somebody holds the secrets? Do you think somebody out there knows something, or maybe has a piece of information that they don't even know is as relevant as it could be?
Yeah, absolutely they do, Nicola. And it could very much be what you just said, is that someone has a crucial piece of information, but they don't realise it. And I think that's why the Gardai were stressing this week that, you know, no matter how trivial the piece of information you have, don't decide yourself if it's trivial. Contact the Gardai and let them decide, because it might be the most innocuous little piece of information, but it could be the very key that unlocks this case. And I suppose the other thing to reference in terms of the timing of this case is that this wasn't the only disappearance that happened in Fermoy around this period. And again, it's one of those bizarre coincidences that around a short time before Conor and Sheila Dwyer disappeared, there was a local businessman called Bill Fennessy, and he vanished. And so within the space of, I think, about 12 months to 18 months, you had a couple and a businessman who vanished without trace from the same town. Now, about 12 years ago, the sub-aqua team in Fermoy were doing a training exercise. The training exercise took place after very heavy flooding in the river. And of course, the flooding had shifted part of the riverbed.
Right.
And just as the divers were about to finish their day's activity, they spotted what the outline of what they thought was a car embedded in the riverbed. They went to investigate. Sure enough, it was a car. They went back to dive on the car again, and they managed to get a license plate. So they were able to determine that it was a Daihatsu Charade car, which was precisely the type of car that Bill Fennessy was driving when he vanished. And subsequent dives on the car found his remains. So in that case, closure was able to be offered to his family. And I think for the Gardai and for the entire community in Fermoy, they're hoping and praying that the same type of closure is offered the family of the Dwyers.
Right. Well, Ralph, thanks so much for coming on, and we'll keep an eye on that. And if anybody has information, they are to give it to Crime Call on 1800 40 50 60 or Fermoy Garda Station. Thanks a million, Ralph.
Not a bother, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.